in the back. Each of the clubs, Trojans for Liberty, USC GOP, and Young Americans for Freedom, have each brought their own speakers, and I'll leave it to Mr. Murphy to introduce them.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Come on up, everybody. Get our esteemed panel up here. A special thanks to Alex for doing a lot of the heavy work with the clubs to organize all this. And thank you all for coming. Now, we're all on the right, so grab any seat you want. We won't try to sort that out. All right, beautiful. I'm here, yeah, and you guys, we got the star talent here in the middle. I'm Mike Murphy. I'm co-director of the Center for the Political Future here. Thank you for coming. I'm proud of this event because when I started here, I said we need more voices on the right. And so under Alex's leadership, we went to the various clubs, Trojans for Freedoms, YAP, and the College Republicans, and said, look, we're paid for the pizza. You guys each pick a speaker and jointly come up with a bunch of questions that they can talk about, discuss, and in some cases debate to have that kind of discussion. So they did the heavy work. I've got the questions. I just have to begin with a quick plug. For more conservative political drama and fun, tomorrow at Taper Hall at 2:30, Mike Gatto is hosting a discussion between my old friend Anthony Scaramucci, late of the Trump White House and Wall Street, and myself on forever Trump or never Trump. And so we're going to talk about the president and have a good time tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon. You are more than welcome to join. All right, so let me do some introductions here because our groups chose a excellent panel. I'm going to start next to me. This is Shawn Steele, Mr. Republican. Going back to high school for Reagan, was a chairman of the California Republican Party and is currently California Republican Committeeman for California. One of the 3 people who cast California's votes on the National Republican National Committee. It is a job of high honor in the party and a longtime fighter for the cause. Next to him is Jeff Hewitt, who is, this is a true fact. Normally I do a quiz on this. He is the highest ranking in terms of population covered libertarian elected official in the United States from the Libertarian Party. He's a supervisor in Riverside County and has a long career in public government, in local government, trying to change local government, just like, let's see, I'll do a pop culture reference here from Parks and Rec, just like Ron Swanson. This is our own Ron Swanson here with Jeff. And then finally, George Harbison, who comes from the real world of chief financial officer work in different industries for 25 years. He's known for writing for all sorts of important publications that want to hear his voice, like Forbes, Real Clear Markets, and Real Clear Politics, a specialist on the tax code, and generally on world socialism choking out free enterprise everywhere to the detriment of free people. And I'm a washed-up Republican political consultant and your moderator. So we're going to throw some of these questions. I knew you'd like that one, Shawn. We're going to throw some of these questions out. And we don't have a real strict format here. I'd like to just go down the panel. You each take a crack at it. You disagree on something, I'll keep it to you. My main job here is to keep us moving. Now, question 1. And again, these are all developed by the clubs too, so I'm proud of them for doing the work to do that. Do you think on the conservative side, the Republican side now, will there ever be a large faction on the right that cares about deficit spending again? It looks like we know the Democrats aren't too concerned, and it looks like we've kind of stopped being concerned on the Republican side right now, record deficit. So we'll start with Shawn.
Probably not now, because nobody seems to be talking about that. The deficit hawks have kind of disappeared. But on the right, used to be a mantra, but Trump sort of changed the conversation. And what's, maybe some really good CFOs and people that are really good at mathematics and figure out that the end is near and we're all facing doom. But we've heard that mantra for 50 years and it just hasn't happened on my watch and during my time. So, theoretically, if you spend more than you bring in, but the federal government seems to be actually a little more solvent than 98% of the countries in the world. There'll be a day of reckoning, but it's probably not going to be tomorrow, and that's basically how a lot of Americans look at it. Trump has become a big government Republican. He just loves to spend, and he loves to promise a lot of things to a lot of people. It doesn't make conservatives real good, nor Republicans.
Jeff, what do you think?
There we go. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I believe that the conservatives have to go ahead and put this right at the head of their fight. Because at $22 trillion, let's take a pick of that. Okay, $1 trillion is, we've all been to Vegas and we've seen that pile of $1 bills that are $1 million. Now take a million of those piles and put them out in a stadium parking lot, and you got $1 trillion. We got 22 already, and what happens is we have to go ahead. We got to get back to principles. The principle of sound money is what made this country. We've got to do that big time. Trump himself has run up equal deficits to his predecessor, and that's all they talked about was, oh, we got to quit spending $1 trillion more than we have. Well, what he did is he did a tax cut, and he put it on the credit card. That's not a good thing to do. So I think it's going to come back. I think we have to have that, otherwise this will cave. Once we go away from our currency being the currency of the world, then we're in bigger trouble than we even know.
George, you're a numbers guy. What do you
I'm
think?
going to disagree a little bit with Jeff in terms of the Trump tax cut. The comment was made it's putting it on the credit card, but tax receipts have increased year over year as a result of that, and it's the increased growth that the supply-siders said would happen. It happened when Reagan lowered taxes as well. But clearly, the folks on the right are not as concerned about deficits, and I would argue most of them, many of them, are more concerned now about just the level of government spending as opposed to the deficits. The other thing that's come up in the past is this idea of a balanced budget amendment, which scares many on the right simply because it could be used as a bludgeon to raise taxes to bring the budget in line with the expenditures, and would also hamstring us in times of war or other times when we may need to run a deficit.
So what about in the equation of the deficit? You know, you can make the tax argument. Does it raise revenue? Does it cost money? But on the spending side, we Republicans used to talk a lot about curbing entitlements because we have these built-in programs, and as life expectancy goes later, they cost more, and they keep growing at a compound rate. They're like a Tony Soprano loan. Now, politically, it's tough to take them on because people like them, and they vote that way. So we've dabbled in taking them on, and we've lost a few elections on that. President Trump seems to not be particularly checked in on that issue, and nor do most of the congressional Republicans. Do you think on the right we're ever going to be back into facing the reality on entitlements again, or we're just going to ride along and not take that pain to do something a lot of conservative economists think needs to be done? Shawn, you first.
Yeah, Michael, first of all, I'm delighted to be with these guys. You know, when I first heard about them, I didn't know who, you know, where they were coming from. I called them up, and they sounded like me. It was kind of boring, and you know, in different respects. I was a member of the Libertarian Party for 14 years. So I identified with our supervisor. Now he's a supervisor like my wife. And Young Americans for Freedom. I left the college Republicans to get active in Young Americans for Freedom, and back here on this very campus. It's fantastic, the differences that we have in the conservative movement and the similarities. And then somebody came up with a new term called conservatarian. And that kind of describes me in a way, you know, with a lot of nuances and contradictions. I used to like neocons, and now it's, you know, things will change. And that very issue, entitlements, you know, Trump's realized something that Republicans haven't thought about in a long time. We're a middle-class party, but we have natural allies among the working class, and that's something that just proper Republicans couldn't understand. Why would you deal with working class? Well, they've been ignored by the elite left for 30 years. And Trump knew that instinctively. I don't know if Trump is crazy or if he's or he's a mutant. He might be a mutant because he kind of understands these social drifts more than most of us. And of course, that's how he got elected president. And so Republicans now have to reconsider our new alliance with the working class, and they've been really screwed on a lot of the essentials to the expense of both coasts. And yes, entitlements is an important business, important sustenance for folks that are not making a lot of money. Factories have been, towns have been taken away, trade has changed upside down, and it's really, you know, bankrupt a lot of American lives. And I think Trump has reawakened that. Now, things will change. The bet is, and here's the bet that maybe we all agree on this one. If you have an expanding dynamic economy, deficits kind of take care of themselves, at least in the mid-run. If you have an expanding dynamic economy, it makes the working class feel more secure, and the objective reality is we have the most expansive dynamic economy since Eisenhower. We have the lowest unemployment in all categories in history. Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, every category you can think of. So these are, remember them, folks, these are the salad years. You won't have them forever. Enjoy the good times now. And you have to give a lot of that credit to Trump and the Republican Congress for the tax cut and multiple other things that Trump is doing. You may not like his tone, but you got to like his actions.
Jeff, what do you think?
Okay, so we know that there's a guy in jail right now named Bernie Madoff, and he got put in jail because he did what's known as a Ponzi scheme. Okay, Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. It really is. But Ponzi schemes can go on for just about ever, because as long as we have more people coming in and start paying into it, they can pay the entitlements out for the people like we're up here, the older people, to get their payments. However, here in California, we have something far worse than that. We have defined benefit pensions that are far worse than a Ponzi scheme. That this is the greatest crisis we face right now as a state. Forget about the federal government for a second. We're looking at $1 trillion of unfunded liability just in this state. Now, we can't go ahead and print money. We don't have the luxury of having the Federal Reserve at our fingertips to do quantitative easing or creating money out of thin air. We can't do that. So this is going to be really the big thing that we're going to push on, and we're going to give you, the next generation, either no services for a whole lot of taxation, or it will crash in and cause chaos. I would like to see some of these promises that have been made to our public servants come through. But in order to do that, we have to change right now. All new hires have to go over to defined contribution or 401ks that are competitive and sustainable. That's what I'm trying to do in Riverside County right now. That is the biggest issue of our time. We can't go on. Now, as far as medical benefits and Medicare and such like that, if we go to Medicare for all, that will break this whole country completely. But that's a whole other, healthcare reform is a whole other deal.
So, Jeff, I disagreed with you before, and I'm going to agree with you dramatically with your statement. So well done. Ronald Reagan said that the closest thing to eternal life was a government program, and I think that Social Security is the perfect example of that. Once they're in, to get them taken away or removed is almost impossible, and was one of the big concerns that we all had with Obamacare, and it's played out, is that once it's in, it's hard to take it away. In terms of what we should do about the entitlement programs, these things were designed years ago when people didn't live as long. I think that it's not realistic for us to think that we can totally do away with these entitlement programs, but as conservatives, we should do what we can to rein them in. For example, taking the retirement age up for newly entered workers into the workforce. Also, we need to rein in the vast amount of corruption and cheating that goes on with respect to disability, which is a big problem out there. But the one thing you're going to hear the left say, and this is a hot button for me, is we need to take payroll taxes up, and we need to make Social Security not a regressive tax. And that's just not right. And one of the other options that they've talked about is to make Social Security payments, take them away from people that have, quote unquote, done well, retroactively just take them away. And we can't let Social Security become like Medicare became in the 1990s. In the old days, Medicare used to be limited. The amount of tax that would be taken from your check as a salaried person would be limited and cut off at a certain amount, which is the same as it is today with Social Security. But they did away with that in the 1990s, so that someone making 3 times more than somebody else is going to retire and have the exact same Medicare benefits. And I just don't feel that that's right. We can't let that happen with Social Security. We can't let them take the cap on Medicare or Social Security wages up because, again, I don't think that would be fair. And just as a point of reference, the Social Security is going to actually run out of money. And forget the accounting that's gone on with the money directed to the general fund. It's going to run out in 2034. And not that there won't be benefits paid after that, but it'll have to be pay-as-you-go at that point. And then it's going to actually go negative in terms of its cash outflow exceeding its cash inflow in 2022. That's 3 years from now. And Medicare is going to run out of money in 2026. Even with that massive tax increase that took place and continues to this day in the Medicare tax, it's going to run out in 2026. So you can imagine the shock to the system for Medicare for all, to layering on everybody onto a system that's basically going to be bankrupt in less than 10 years.
In the good news report, let me ask a follow-up about the politics of all this. I'm going to zero in on what Jeff said. California, along with many other states, Illinois comes to mind, but there are a bunch of them, are case studies for where the public employees have a, what's called defined, benefit pension plan, which is not seen much in the private sector anymore. And it's a huge debt load on the state. But the problem is, how do you change it? Because the public employee unions have just about more political power in California than anybody else. And in the last 10 years, the Republican registration on this in this state has dropped to an all-time low of about 23%. We're not doing so well other than a few pockets at winning elections here. So if the most powerful thing in the state wants this, how do we undo it as a practical matter? And maybe there's a difference in you guys on the tactics. Go ahead, Shawn.
Boy, first of all, the discussion about pensions and deficits and what could happen in 2026, I'm going to guess that a lot of people here don't really appreciate that or care. I'm going to guess that probably student loans that you'll be imposed on your back unless you got a scholarship and you got lucky is probably something you ought to be thinking about, because it's going to be taking a big piece of your flesh every single month, probably for many of you for the rest of your lives. Or just being a conservative on campus and not getting a rock thrown at your head, or a professor cheating on you and giving you bad grades, or somehow impacting your future. So that to me is kind of like the real world situation that we have to deal with. The other stuff, 2026, 2022, 2023, it's interesting, and I don't think there's a lot that we can do about it because of the dependency cycle, and there's no pain. Here's my vision. I am an optimist. Here's my vision. Sacramento, let's say it's 2024. They absolutely run out of money. I mean, there's just no more cash. Not only that, people are not even taking the state IOUs. We had that a few years ago when the state ran out of money. No IOUs. So you can have 50,000 retired teachers in tie-dye T-shirts and balding heads with ponytails surrounding the state treasurer's building demanding, we want cash, because their pensions run out. And they get violent. They start throwing Molotov cocktails, and then the helicopter sees below. The people are running out of the building, from the state treasurer's office. Then they march to the state capitol, and they set it afire. And the Democrat legislators are on top of the building, and a black helicopter comes and sweeps them away. When that moment happens and the Californians run out of money, then we'll have a political change. And I figure Republicans and Libertarians will have about 6 months of an opportunity to actually change and reform, dramatically restyle government in California like Hiram Johnson did in 1910. That time will come, but not today. That time will come, but people just can't process it and think about it. Look, we're dealing with a parasite called government unions. Look at the parasites on your animals. They don't reason. All they do is eat and feed themselves, and they keep doing it until they kill the host, and then they die themselves. So we're dealing with an irrational parasitical monster you can't reason with. But look, if you try to raise money, Mike knows this better than anybody in this room, and better than I'll ever know, is that when you have some of the few corporate interests left that believe in freedom in California, very, very few, they're all basically, stooges for the state. They come up with money. The California Real Estate Association every year, semi-free market, will come up with $5 million for political capital for their friends every single political year. Now, most of that's now going to Democrats, but forget the realtors. They're nothing. The Bankers Association, the car dealers, you named them. They're nothing. The California Teachers Association, with a special assessment of only 350,000 members, can raise $10 million political money a month. The unions have all the money, 90% in some cases, that can dominate California politics. In the meanwhile, what's happened to Republicans? Mike's right, 23%. Where did people suddenly decide I'm not a Republican anymore? No, they went to Texas. Californians reelected Ted Cruz. There is now 4 million people have left California since 1995, net loss. We're losing population, and largely because the middle classes are fleeing California. And how many here is actually planning to live in California once you graduate? Because the jobs aren't here. And if you wanted to live here, you can't get a job that's going to buy the house that you were born in. Those realities make Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas much more attractive. And that's the biggest reason we're losing population. So at the end of the day, yeah, the day of reckoning is going to come. Let's hope we're prepared for it, those of us that are still choosing to live in California.
Jeff, you're on the front lines actually trying to do this in Riverside County. What are you learning?
Okay, I'll play a little bit of word game here. You know, good PR is what we all want, right? But I look at this as PR being principle over preference. You know, I've always been a libertarian. I've registered libertarian ever since I was 18, and I got involved in the party, the National Party, about 5 years ago. The difference is that libertarians, and when you have that inside of you, you don't go ahead and move somewhere else. You know, I always say I'm going to be the last person to turn out the light here. This is my home. This is my home for the last 3 generations, and I expect to go ahead and bring it back to what it was when I was a child and had all the opportunity to have my own business for nearly 40 years. Here's what the deal is. My opponent took nearly $400,000 from public employee unions to go ahead and beat me. He was a Republican. And Republicans left and right now go ahead and take the money from the unions because they say that's what we need to win. I'm sorry, the message we put out from day one was that, look, we're going to fix this. It turns out that most of the people in Riverside County don't work for the government. And all those people that haven't been heard need somebody. And that's why the future of the conservative movement here is, with as many bodies in here as there are in this room right now, I could go win any office. Because when you believe and you have principles, that rubs off on other people. Most of the people out there are listening for people with direction and with principles. If you have that, you can do anything.
George, anything to add?
Well, I would just add in terms of where the state could come up with money to, or what the outcome could be. You know, there's been cities and states that have gone bankrupt. I think the city of Detroit comes to mind. And if that were to happen, or were possibly happening, it wouldn't surprise me if California went to Washington, D.C. with hat in hand. And it would be a very interesting political dynamic at that point, when and if that were to happen, and depending on the composition of the House and Senate at the time. The other thing that I get worried about is, you know, are we tapped out tax-wise? I happen to feel that way, but there's wealth tax out there that I think that the folks on the left would love to get their hands on people's savings as opposed to their income. So I think that that's a direction that we'll be faced with down the road as this problem continues.
So something else that's changed. When I joined this thing, I was a college Republican in the early 80s, and I was at the Georgetown Foreign Service School. We were going to go off to fight the Russians. And one of the things we believed in was free trade in the Republican Party. Now, that's not the current posture. And there's a lot of stress between the congressional Republicans and the president on this. Do we think the party will go back to its old free trade mantra, or are we in the populist business now, which means the free trade days of the GOP are long behind us? Why don't we start with Shawn and go down the...
That's a big question, Michael. Who made up these questions? I want to see some faces with these questions. These are kind of complicated. You got questions for 3 hours, and I think we have a consensus here. We're going to lock the doors and answer every question. For the next 3 hours, no bathroom privileges. Is that a good idea? I'm not feeling it. All right. Free trade. You know, of course Adam Smith is right. When you have... You know, basically, it's the grifters, it's the looters that get in the way of free trade. You have two individuals that want to commence in an arrangement. It's none of my business, certainly not the government's business. But ever since we got a customs house, going back to the Middle Ages, the custom house is the looter. He's the mafioso. He's got the guns. And you want to bring a bunch of tea here? Well, you got to pay me 10%, and basically it's a bribe. That's why we in the ancient days in feudal Europe, you had little way stations of the gang of bandits or the local king or the local prince, and if you wanted to move your carriage from a couple of miles, you had to pay along the way, kind of like parts of Mexico today. So there's always been barriers against free trade. So theoretically, absolutely, I consider myself a free trader. Trouble is, with the so-called free trade pacts in the last 50 years, they haven't been free trade. They have been deals and ruthless deals, especially both sides, Republicans and Democrats, where there got to be environmental concerns, you got to have minimal protection for workers, you got to have union rights, you got to have all. So all these, the North American Free Trade Pact wasn't free. You'd made deals with corrupt Mexico or with the Canadian socialists, and so we really never had free trade. Even in the days that you were excited, and in Georgia, it wasn't free. There were deals being cut right and left, and so you had trade highly restricted. Finally, Trump's made it honest. He wants a better deal for Americans, and not so much for some certain corporate, although corporations will benefit, but he wants I would say it's more transparent. He wants a deal where the Chinese aren't subsidized by the American people. That kind of makes sense to me.
Jeff?
Yeah, going back historically, yeah, we had the thuggies, and that's where the term thug comes from. When you're trying to go from the Orient out to the West, then you had to, you had to pay your way there or just get beat up and killed. We also had the Somali pirates more recently too, and they sat there, and the Japanese that came over and fished out all their area in the Red Sea, and they saw the Suez Canal was getting a bunch of money when these tankers and such would come through there. They thought, hey, all we got to do is go out there with a boat and a motor and get our little cut on it. That didn't work out all that well. But, free trade is, how many people in here love Uber and Airbnb? Do you guys like that stuff? Okay, that's what happens when you have free trade. That's what happens when you and somebody else that has something that you want have an interaction, and whether you trade something and respond or use that liquid thing called money in exchange. Tariffs are just another tax, whether it's on one side or another. Every time there is, somebody says, oh, we got a $600 billion trade deficit. Well, unlike our deficit on how much we owe, that's not a bad thing. Every time you buy something, and if you're buying something that's cheaper from another country or something, that's more money you have to spend on yourself here, on at-home businesses and stuff. So this particular president has it totally wrong, and every time he goes ahead and does his little wand, we're going to get back at those darn Chinese and everything, what happens is you could have dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of soy farmers that totally almost lose their business because of the way he made his wand. That's terrible. I'm totally against tariffs under anything, and the more people trade, and to quote Adam Smith, when you stop the flow of goods across borders, then you start the flow of armies. It's all tied in.
George, free trade or Trump trade?
Yeah, it's interesting. The question that was proffered that I saw said, have Trump's tariffs permanently shifted the conservative movement away from free markets and free trade? And I would tell you no, that don't assume that Trumpism and conservatism are one and the same. Conservative values will remain the same, core tenets that we all know: free trade, individual rights, personal responsibility, the sanctity of innocent human life, et cetera, et cetera. So, no, conservatism will remain the same. It's an ageless set of values that brings the most prosperity to the most people in the history of the world. That being said, I agree that tariffs and barriers to trade are not good things. I'd also say that there are barriers to trade that exist, and some conservatives, and sometimes I believe this, are giving Trump the benefit of the doubt that he's doing the art of the deal and that he's being hard and harsh on tariffs, with damage being done, I acknowledge, that will hopefully at the end of the day remove as many international barriers to trade as possible.
So we're in this world now of what I'll call Tucker Carlson populism, which include things like less free trade, not being concerned about some of the old fiscal conservative issues. Do we think that's permanent, and that's the new direction of the Republican Party? Do we think it's temporary? And are we not alarmed that it's so different? I'm kind of alarmed. I'm curious about you guys, though, that the old sheet music isn't being played. Do we think it'll, as George was kind of arguing on free trade, it'll come back because they're timeless values and we're in an aberration now? Or maybe not. It lost last time. Trump won. What do we think the future holds, and is there a rooting interest on either side between your different wings of the conservative movement? Shawn, you're first.
Yeah, I like Tucker a lot. I like his dad. I like the whole Carlson family. It's just fascinating, interesting, riveting. I'm not sure what Tucker populism is. I'm kind of don't like populism because that kind of implies there's going to be a mass movement of people that will vote a certain way and that will be irrational and can adopt crazy platforms that would be anti-liberty. So populism has its problems, but Trump's kind of populism, won him the presidency, and he expanded the coalition, at least temporarily. We'll see how long that coalition lasts, if it even grows. So I'm not worried about anything being permanent by just a temporary fad. I look at the long term. The Republican Party's first successful president, Lincoln, had three basic platforms, and that was number one was abolition of slavery, one of the most fantastic human rights issues of all time. Never in the history of the world has one race of people fought each other to liberate another race of people, and that's the permanent American iconic grandeur and greatness. Secondly, was Transcontinental Railroad. Well, there's some socialism with that, and created some problems, but it got a railroad built. And third was the Homestead Act. Created one of the greatest movements of property rights and a mass movement of people in world history. So those are enduring values. Proud of those values, and so the mood right now is kind of a ill-defined populism. I think it's probably healthy for Republicans, not just to talk to each other at a country club. There's a lot more people than at a country club. I mean, Republicans are essentially middle class, suburban, professionals, farmers and merchants and ranchers. That's all good, but that's not enough to make a majority in America.
Jeff.
I think the timeless values are what has kept this country the longest lasting government in the history of the world without a violent overchange, with 243 years or whatever it is. Those timeless values are, what Shawn just said about the Homestead Act. What did the Homestead Act do? We had all these new lands that were available to the population at large, and it gave them something that is so important in this country, and that's private property rights, once they went ahead and staked a claim. So at that point, it changed from just being a socialistic land of everybody or whatever, and they were able to build on that. There were some big challenges that came out in Lincoln's time, and again, fighting slavery, that's an amazing thing. It shows what we're capable of when we really put our values first. And everybody in here is here because of values. Conservatives have values. And to change this, we need to go ahead and we need to put that in a manner that populism is basically playing to the lowest common denominator. We don't need to do that. When you talk to somebody and say, look, this is how it goes, this is the way I see it, and you talk up to them, it's amazing what people understand. That's why I always say when somebody says, oh, the voters are too stupid, they can't understand what, that means you're getting your message out there, and you're not speaking to them as either equals or, like I say, I've already said I'm the dumbest one in the room because I'm going ahead and taking care of all of the things that you don't have time to while you go out and enjoy your life.
George?
So I mentioned some of the basic tenets of conservatism a moment ago, and Tucker Carlson believes in many of these principles, but he does denigrate the morality of the market system when he says things like this, and I'll read it to you. Market capitalism is a tool like a staple gun or a toaster. You'd have to be a fool to worship it. Our system was created by human beings for the benefit of other human beings. We do not exist to serve markets, just the opposite. Any economic system that weakens and destroys families is not worth having. A system like that is the enemy of a healthy society. So a free market society system, according to Carlson, while it's provided us with prosperity, has provided us with things like drug addiction and suicide in certain parts of the country, implying that capitalism and free markets are responsible for our personal shortcomings as well as for our prosperity. And as a traditional conservative, I disagree with that, and I disagree with Tucker Carlson. Our conservative, traditional thinkers, including our founding fathers and religious leaders, disagree because they recognize that prosperity could not exist without freedom, and freedom could not exist without virtue. James Madison said, to suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. So I do not agree with Tucker Carlson. I don't think the conservative movement is going to take on that particular side of his position.
So among Americans who are over 65, Mitt Romney was elected president, so was Donald Trump. Among Americans under 40 who, because of demography in time, become all Americans, Romney got beat and Trump got beat even worse. Romney carried Orange County, Trump did not. So, yet Trump won. But it is a mathematical fact that my joke always is when the Republican Army, being older as it is on the march, you can see us coming, one Walker step at a time. If old tennis shoes are ever made illegal by the socialists, we're screwed. How do we get younger voters? Because right now in the market, which we believe, the market's telling us a message. We don't want what you're selling. And I don't care if it's country club Republicans, you know, kind of a pejorative term, but I'll take it for the point of argument, like Mitt Romney, my old friend and client, or populist Republicans like Donald Trump. Because if you look at every mark-to-market event in the market of politics since Donald Trump got elected, 75% of the time we got our clock cleaned. In the special elections in 17, in the midterms in 18. Now, the Democrats always save us. They may nominate Bernie or somebody who can't put a hairbrush together, let alone economic laws. Who knows? But the trend has been awful in the marketplace, which is the truth we ought to listen to. So, how do we get younger voters and reverse this trend so we hold political power on the right? And Shawn, I'll start with you.
That's even not on the list. That's cheating. That's a good question, though. It's a great question.
Yeah, I threw that one in, by the way. That was moderator's prerogative. I have some algebra tests coming up too. But anyway,
my brain's now blank. No, the baby boomers were the great left-wing forces in America. We used to watch those models. Some argue that I'm a baby boomer, and so you watch the election cycles, and it was always the baby boomer generation that voted left. Well, it's changed. They got more mature, they grew up, and they're pretty conservative for the most part. So what happens, it's a process of age. It's Winston Churchill. You know, if you weren't a socialist at 20, you didn't have a heart. If you're not a conservative by 30, you don't have a brain. And so there's always that generational impact that's kind of enduring in Western democracies. And the other problem that the left has is that the older folks aren't dying soon enough. They're really pissed off about that. But people are living longer and longer and longer. And the students in this room, you guys are going to be around 100 years. Man, that's going to be really boring, and you're going to be really old when you reach 100. So I think here's where I would go. I think the libertarians probably have the best message of all. They're more pure on liberty. They're more outspoken. They're cleaner. The trouble is they've had a marketing problem, and somehow this guy gets elected, a real job. Riverside supervisor impresses the hell out of me. He ran against a real corporate Republican that really needed to get defeated. But he did something very imaginative. He had a little city that was going broke, and they had a fire department that they wanted to expand and make bigger, which would have put the city in bankruptcy in just a few short years. He got a national reputation for convincing the city fathers to completely change the makeup of the fire department and to make it self-sustainable. And so it's something that's quite exciting. When you talk about freedom and individual rights, I think that appeals to a lot of young people. But the other reality is, how about some damn good jobs? How about being able to be an entrepreneur without having some government or some monopoly force put you out of business? And I got to tell you, our friends in Silicon Valley is the great enemy. These are true monopolists. They really depend upon government power to advance their careers and their fortunes. And they are really the biggest anti-freedom element, I think, in America right now. So there needs to be a new discussion. Privacy is awfully important. I think that's important to a lot of millennials. But we haven't yet found the right messengers. I'll end with this. I was thinking, I was on the Republican National Committee, and I thought, God, we got all these young guys running for president. All of our guys are in their 40s. Marco Rubio speaks Spanish, and Ted Cruz might speak Spanish, and he's a senator, and we got women running, Carly Fiorina, and then we have a whole bunch of people, all pretty young, and then this old man with orange hair comes down an escalator, and he's spoiling the party. We had a whole new generation. And so we get a guy that's as old as Bill Clinton, and he becomes president of the United States, and that kind of upset so many perceptions. I think you make it really clear that socialism is the great demonic evil of all mankind. It always has been. and liberty and fairness and fair play and a good culture is really the best future for people in general. And I think you stick with a nice, pure message. I think that works in the long run.
Jeff, how do we win younger voters so we're not all on the road to serfdom?
La gran parte de los jóvenes son latinos. Y si podemos hablar directamente a ellos, a las oportunidades de los libertarianos y del derecho, podemos cambiar el mundo muy fácil. What I said was we need to do, we start having to act like the largest growing portion of our demographics actually matter. You know, most immigrant families, whether they're first, second, or third generation, they bring with them the American dream. That's why they came here. You know, a lot of them braved hot deserts, coyotes that would leave them, you know, stuffed in a truck in 120 degrees to save their own skins. These are people that should be on the right. But since Prop 187, and we've let this president demonize them and call them rapists and murderers, they have no higher percentage of rapists and murderers than anybody else. But this should be our best friend, our neighbor to the south, and all those countries that have a whole lot of people yearning to be free, and the right needs to bring them in with open arms right now. Now, like I say, we need principles, we need ideas that young people can hold on to. Young people are smart enough today to not take the bullshit that we've been throwing them. In my time, I remember when our parents would have a cigarette and a martini and tell us that if we caught you with marijuana, you know, then that was going to be the end of the world. Well, isn't it so ironic today that because of the opiate crisis, you know, we were led to believe that was going to lead right on in 2 weeks to heroin, and yet doctors today are more and more prescribing cannabis for pain instead of opiates, because the side effects are giggling and eating snacks instead of dying. So we have to have a message that relates to young people and say, hey, we're going to give you a great country that's not totally broke, if we can help that, and you take it to the next level.
I think I'm going to switch to libertarian. That was excellent. I agree with every word. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Just before we're all ready, those of us on the right, to jump off the building, I just wanted to put some things in perspective, and that is that even after the election in the midterms, at the state level, in the legislative bodies, the 100 or so bodies in the states, 61 of those are controlled by Republicans. 61 of the 100, almost two-thirds. So it's not all lost. Certainly it's trending in a difficult direction, but it's not all lost. The other thing that I point out from a macro level is that there are 36 states in which both houses of the state and the governor are held by the same party. And you might not realize this, but of those 36 states, 22 of them are Republican. Again, not all is lost. So I think in terms of getting the young voters, I know I've got a lot of gray hair and I go back to the Reagan days, but Ronald Reagan won that generation by, I believe, about 20 percentage points. And so I think that the message that he was able to convey, the timeless message we need to go back to and communicate. Two other thoughts. The Democrats are going to help us do this, because what has gone on in the Democrat Party recently I just can't imagine, and it's not going to help us down the road. Let me just give you some of the things that I wrote down. In the past year, we had the appalling treatment of Supreme Court Brett Kavanaugh. We had the embracing of socialism, the Green New Deal. If you don't think that's socialism, reread it. Radical late-term abortion legislation, the support of reparations for slavery, going to Al Sharpton to seek affirmation as a candidate for president. Failure to accept the border crisis in support of sanctuary cities, so a little disagreement on the panel here. Acceptance of the Covington kid and the Nathan Phillips debacle, and the silence on the Jussie Smollett situation. That's going to help us. I think the young people out there are watching that, and I just can't imagine they're getting aligned with that. One last thought is we've got to get back the colleges and universities. I've spoken on colleges and universities for the last 3 years, delivering lectures, and it's overwhelmingly to the left. I don't have the answer on how to do that, but I'll give you a one fact on that. I helped some students here at this university form a Young Americans for Freedom chapter. And the single biggest thing, the single biggest gating issue for us was to get one member of the faculty to be the faculty rep for Young Americans for Freedom. And it never happened. We had to get a member of the administration to step in and take that. So we've got to do something to get the schools back.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I used to go out and do some college outreach for the Libertarian Party, and this was during 2016, and Bernie supporters were everywhere. They loved him, you know, and when they ride by, they go, Bernie, Bernie, and I go, hey, come on over, I love Bernie, come on over. I said, hey, listen, the guy's genuine, he's exciting, but let me put it this way. In a libertarian society, if you want to go ahead and form a commune or a co-op with your friends voluntarily, have at it. Nobody's going to get in your way. But if you go ahead and force and impose your way on everybody else who a free market system or capitalism may work very well for, once you force them into your commune, you're no different than any tyrant in the history of man. And that's when they started listening. Ideas are fine, but we don't need to demonize what we consider the opposition. What we do is we bring them in, because our ideas will always win in the end, because they have merit and they have principle.
So this is our last lightning round question, because I want to get to your question. So address it quickly. Somebody wrote it. I don't know who, but I kind of like the question. What is one thing the right should learn from the left in terms of tactics?
That's a great question, and because you're talking about here and now. I think the right has had so many political successes in the last 30 years, with the great exception of Obama, that we've gotten real complacent. Trump has taken all the energy and all the time, and the Democrats are furious. They're angry. They're motivated. They're reading Saul Alinsky. They're militant, and they're organizing everywhere. This is something. And if we didn't learn anything from 2018, we got to realize that, you know, the Democrats aren't just the loyal opposition. They are radicalized. They're getting so extreme it's almost funny, but I don't laugh at it. You have to look at the polls, and Bernie is not the crazy guy. He's actually kind of more of a moderate Democrat now compared to others. When they take issues like the Green Deal and reparations seriously, they actually have a serious discussion about it. You know, they're certified psychotics. So I think the right, if you love liberty and if you want to grow and prosper in the society, you got to get organized, got to get militant. But you know what? I came here when I was invited. I didn't realize there were 3 conservative right clubs on campus, and I think that's thrilling. I think that's exciting. I'm suing Berkeley right now because they have their anti-conservative attitude, because they beat up a bunch of kids from Young Americans for Freedom, and I'm having a great time at that. We're having a deposition soon. I'll be selling tickets to that. With some of the administrators. The key is there's a war on campus. The center of the cancer is on American universities, and it's going to be a lot more militancy, but I can tell you right now, I just wrote a piece on lawfare. There's a lot of conservative lawyers ready to represent pro bono any student anywhere in America that's just trying to express a conservative view. So time to start kicking some serious ass, getting angry, challenge the professors, and exercise your free speech to the maximum.
Jeff?
Okay, so you guys have all watched the UFC fight, and generally the one that wins is the one that tries the hardest. In politics, it's just like a UFC fight. It's exactly like it. And that's what I found out. It took me a year to win this position. And I'll tell you what, I mean, I had less money, I'm a heck of a lot better, I'm not as good looking as my opponent or anything else. But I'll tell you what, I tried as hard as I possibly could. This is coming from a guy that has dug 10,000 swimming pools. A lot of picking and shoveling, a lot of handwork, and this was the hardest thing I ever did. What we have to do as a movement, the conservative movement, is we have to go out there and outwork them. The Democrats and the left have worked very hard for this. when they win, they go out and they ballot harvest and stuff. That's hard work. And we need to go out there and we need to take, okay, so remember 3% in 1776 went ahead and got the revolution started and actually formed this great experiment. All it takes is 3% again, and that means that each and every one of you in here, if you believe deep down inside that you want a future where you want not only opportunity for yourself to thrive, but opportunity for everybody else that you don't even know, then you've got to get out there and you've got to lay it down, get your feet on the pavement and start going. We have 3 great clubs in here, and I'm a little bit partial to the Young Americans for Liberty, obviously, but we have to start working together as clubs and stuff and get out there and spread that, because I guarantee you most of the people out there, and remember, a lot of times when you're in the upper division science class and stuff, you're not going to get through to them anyway. They're too worried about passing that organic chemistry or something like that. But there's a lot of people out there that are wanting to know where to go, and it's your jobs in here to make them do that. I'm telling you, we can do that if we work hard, and that's all it is. And again, reach out to los Latinos, because there's so many of them that don't get included, and we need to have them, we need to be their first stop that they come to.
All right, George, wrap it up for us.
Yeah, real quick, and I agree with everything that's been said. I would also hope that despite the differences from the folks on the board, on the panel today, that those differences can be worked out, or we can all work together to defeat this. Because if the left takes over this state, as they have, and they take over the country, and we have Bernie Sanders as president, it's just going to be a horrible situation. So we need to set aside our differences and work together.
So we have some microphone runners. Any question? There we are in the white shirt. Let's see. Who do I see with a hand up here? Sir, right in front. And please, quick questions so we can get to a couple of them.
Gentlemen, thanks so much. I'm a microbiologist here, and I'm going to ask a deeply myopic question in that spirit. So given 3 facts, first, that the left has, over the course of the past decade, positioned themselves as the party of science. I won't comment whether they deserve that moniker. 2, that the overwhelming majority of researchers and academics are on the left. And 3, that the recent budget proposals have cut funds to the NIH and the NSF, or proposed to. How can the right and the center retake their reputation as a scientifically rigorous organization?
Who wants to take that?
I'll just offer that I think some of the best science doesn't come from universities, comes from the private sector. And I actually appreciate the private sector scientists that actually are trying to create greater good. Sadly, American science in the universities is questionable. It's been threatened. It's government grants. It's who you know. It's who you can please, which bureaucrats have particular agendas and how extreme they want to go on things like an extreme version of climate, or rather global warming. And so I think if we have to, calling it, the pro-science community, I think that's laughable in many parts of the world. I think a lot of very serious, sober people look at some of these scientists, so-called scientists, and really can't take them seriously. And I'd like to see a lot less government going to universities.
Right, quickly, Jeff, and then another question.
Real quick, I do have a degree in biology. I'm not the world's utmost climatologist or whatever, but I do know the scientific method. And pollution is real. That's fine. We can deal with pollution and everything else. But to go ahead and put that agenda where it's going to drive us into a third world status, if we, you can't push this ahead and say we're going to have all these, clean energy by this time, blah, blah, blah. So go out and engage each one of your friends and say, let's talk about this. This don't go along with what side you agree with. Let's take it one-on-one. These conversations should be going on all the time. And that's how we go ahead and take the high road on that.
When I was in college, the so-called ideology of science warned us about the nuclear freeze and the fact that we were going to be frozen out by the year 2000. So keep that in mind when you hear people claim to be the party of science.
All right, next question. Yes, sir.
Thank you guys for being here. So I'm Hispanic. I came from another country, and a lot of people in this other country, they have conservative values. They're all about working hard. Most of them are Catholic, et cetera, et cetera. So how do I, when I speak with my family or my other Hispanic friends, do I convey to them that they do hold conservative values, that for the most part they are conservative, but that in this country it's pushed that if you're a minority, you need to be on the Democratic side. So how do I convey to them that what they believe in is actually conservative values?
Who wants to start with that?
It's, my wife's Korean-American immigrant, waited years to get here. There's millions of people that have waited in line to come to America and filling out the paperwork and such, and we need more immigrants. America's getting older, needs a lot more immigrants, but people that can really add a lot of value. And so I think ultimately it's a matter of values. People that come here that love America, love the principles, and want to work, those are my kind of people. Folks that want to come here and they want to scam and live off of welfare and do bad things, we don't need them. And I think the key is appealing to those people that adopt American values and reach out to them. And we need messengers in those communities. We need you.
To your family members, I would tell them, get involved right away. I mean, you yourself and anybody else, get involved in the community as an activist or anything else, and teach them about, make it local, so it's not so much Democratic, Republican as much, but they're learning about, you know, being a part of their community and stuff, and then get them running for local office. And start getting them around a lot of conservative other people that it'll start rubbing off on them. There's a lot of small businessmen and everything. I mean, the immigrant community is full of entrepreneurs. Get them with other entrepreneurs. You'll be surprised at the transformation that your family will see. You see, and the church community, everything else like that. Bring that in. Those are all very conservative values that you can bring along to the side. Say, we don't have to go with this crazy. This is not going to end well. This is going to be Venezuela for sure if we keep going in that direction. We've seen it in Greece, everywhere else. Use those examples and get them involved.
And I would just add, provide some resources in terms of great writers from the right. Thomas Sowell comes to mind. We were talking about him before we got up here. Send them those articles. Tell them to read them. And if they resonate with them, tell them that that's what a conservative right person thinks.
We have time for one final mega question. You, right in the middle there. You can make a pitch for Bill Weld if you want.
I'm all
Get
right.
the panel going a little.
Actually, I have a question. Since we're kind of a nuanced group, we have three different representatives of the right. What's a good solution to what is a crushing welfare system where it is running us bankrupt? It is something that is a huge problem, even if it is not going to crash tomorrow. I think a lot of people my age want to know what are some real solutions to fix that, where you're also not putting people out who may be depending on that severely at the moment. I mean, I've heard some people suggest UBI, of course, even in the name of Milton Friedman, who suggested negative income tax. What would you propose as an alternative or a way out?
I'm going to reverse the order here. Start with our numbers man, George.
Yeah, we'll continue. I think the best way out is a strong economy, a vibrant economy. The number of people on welfare has fallen off. The number of people on food stamps has fallen off as this economy has improved. And I think just taking care of the economy and making sure that continues into the future is the best way out.
It's gotten so bad that the UBI, I mean, the Uniform Basic Income, is actually starting to make sense. So with that said, I'm not putting my blessing on it, but I'll tell you what, we're getting ready to start a pilot program there in the county that takes people that are on entitlements right now, whether they be SNAP or food stamps or Section 8 housing or whatever else, in a particular areas, and say, hey, look, you're going to 3 days a week, you're going to come down, you're going to put on rubber gloves, you're going to put on a mask, and as the garbage trucks come into the dump, you get to go ahead and we're going to get 100% recycling. Now, do I care about recycling that much? Not really. But what it does is it gets people outside their house. It shows them how to get to work, at least 3 days out of 5 working days. And guess what? They're going to be doing something to get some of those entitlements. And you'd be surprised if they're doing something really smelly and it's not very glamorous, when those other offers come in, they're not going to hold out for management. When people say, we only want to attract good jobs, well, I got news for you. Any job's a good job because it's that much less than we have to go ahead and subsidize them with other taxpayers' money. That's how we cure that, starting with. And you'd be surprised once somebody gets the dignity and seeing the value of their work back. It's amazing.
Great answers across the board. I'd say that I like a federalist system. I like having 50 state experiments. I want to keep the feds out of this. Let New York die an inglorious death. Let the smart people get out. Let people leave New Jersey and leave it high and dry, and let them live in their own stew. And sadly, the same applies to California. Some states are going to prosper and do real well and be great for young people. Other states are not going to do so well. And we just watch those experiments right in front of us. Someday, California is going to run out of other people's money.
It surprised me, but the higher minimum wage initiative in Seattle actually worked pretty well. I would have bet it wouldn't have, but higher wages solve a lot of problems because capitalism is better at paying people than transfer payments. But there's no doubt that if you're in that band of the working poor where government punishes you for working, but you need more money you can get to survive any kind of dignified life with transfer payments, the incentives are backwards there. So I don't even mind some voucher stuff and things like that because we got to raise those wages. Or we're going to have a majority vote in this country that's going to want big changes that are not going to be good for capitalism. Anyway, that was my one editorial I slipped in. Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow if you want to see me and Scaramucci fight about Trump at 2:30 at Taper. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you to our esteemed panel here for a great job.